Ladies and gentlemen, Kellyn Anderson.
This is so cool to see the other side of the Fireside chat, finally. I'm really nervous, and I know it's a bad way to start anything because it's like compounds the nervousness sometimes, but it's because this is a really important topic to me, and I think it should be important to everyone. So I was like just agonizing over what to say, what not to say in a 20-minute period, and I kind of just tried to consolidate some things that I think are really important. So yeah, the main sort of theme I'm focusing on is fertility awareness in women's health. And I just kind of want to talk about why it matters to me, why I think it matters to women, and why I think it just should matter in our culture in general. Yeah, and so actually, like, just beforehand, I was talking to Holly, and I was like, I am so nervous because there's so many ways you can approach fertility. You can approach it socially, physically, emotionally, economically, politically, and she said, like, that's just it. Like, there's so many ways to talk about this, and some people might not have seen it in a way that you do. So I was like, okay, I can do this. Yeah, so I guess I just want to start off with, like, just a bit more personal rationale as to why this has become such a focus in my life of like the past few years. I am a woman. I have a uterus, which becomes very relevant very soon in your life, as we all know. And I spent a lot of time trying to hide things about my cycle. There's a lot of shame surrounding cycles. Also, if my face starts turning red, it's partially because I'm nervous, but also I'm Irish, and when I get fired up, I just go red. Yeah, so I felt a lot of the shame that I think a lot of women feel surrounding their cycles, and I think that's compounded by our culture and the way we treat it. First and foremost, I'm obsessed with language, and so the whole idea that we call it a menstrual cycle is actually kind of incorrect. The menstrual period is part of the cycle, but it's actually an ovulatory cycle. So the main event of a woman's cycle monthly is actually ovulation, which is the release of the egg, versus the shedding of the uterus lining, which happens later. And so I think just the whole concept of growing up, realizing that this menstruation thing happens, which is the most obvious part of your cycle, there's blood involved, there's pain, there's confusion. It can kind of give you the wrong idea about what that part is for. And if you don't know what it's connected to necessarily, you might have like a general idea about ovulation, the egg thing. But like, if you don't really know why it's happening, you can associate it with waste versus like what it actually is, which is this nutrient-rich thing that occurs in your body every month. And so, yeah, especially even just like in Walmart and places like that, oftentimes like the pads and all those things are right next to like incontinence things, so like adult diapers, and it's like, interesting. I wonder what this is fomenting, and especially the minds of young women and what we think is happening with our uterus. And so I think for a long time, before I started becoming aware of my own fertility and charting and knowing about the cycles, I thought a lot of the discharges involved with the uterus and the cervix were just waste, like that they weren't really anything. Because I can remember getting different discharges and being like, oh, this must just be, I don't know, like it's just more waste stuff. And I didn't really know what it meant. So I think there was, like shame in that, there was lack of education, and I think that's really common with a lot of women. And also the men in their lives not really knowing what it's for and what it's about. So it matters to me because my own journey through this, and I'm not like a professional, or I don't know everything about it yet, and I never will. But what I've learned so far has been very liberating for me, and it has kind of set me on this track of appreciating that part of me a lot more than I used to. And it's a normalization of physicality, I think, because I do notice in our culture like a divide between the mind and the body a lot of the time, and the normal, beautiful, regular functions of the human body, male, female, whatever, are often seen as disgusting or wrong or shameful. And so I've come to a lot of healing through learning about my own body. and being able to appreciate other people's bodies more too, like in a more respectful way. So that's why it's important for me. And yeah, so the way I kind of came through to that was through the fertility awareness method, which I started learning about at St. Therese School of Faith and Mission, where they teach it in the context of family planning or like birth control, like as a means of birth control. But just in general, I really want to emphasize the importance of it just being a self-knowledge thing. Like, it can be used very effectively for birth control. It can be used to promote pregnancy and try to achieve pregnancy, but I think it's really integral to a woman to know these things about herself. And I think in our culture that's not very prevalent. So that started sort of that journey for me, where I was actually starting to get a bit more interested in it. I think I went to a friend's house once in high school, and her mom, who taught one of the methods, tried to teach us about it, and was like, ew, no thank you. But at St. Therese, I was more of an adult, or I pretended to be one, and so I was like, okay, this seems important, and it's just continued to grow. And so I'll just do a very practical overview of what the fertility awareness method would actually look like. And so there's lots of different ways to approach it, but it usually involves the tracking of your monthly cycle using a physical chart or an app to track your fertile window, so your ovulatory cycle, period of your cycle, and your menstrual cycle. And so you start building up all this information as you go, as you're tracking the quality of your cervical mucus, which is, it's not just this waste that gets sloughed off. It's actually something that's indicating your hormone levels. It's indicating any number of things. It's incredible what you can gauge from knowing about these things. So yeah, it's very practical. It's kind of a disciplined thing, because you have to pay attention to your body, and you have to be dedicated to that. And I'm not a disciplined person, so I've charted on and off throughout years. But it grounds you and it connects you to your body in a way that I don't think is possible if you're not doing that. If you're not taking that time out of your day and taking that time to really pay attention to your body. And I think in our culture, when I'm saying oh, this isn't a prevalent thing, I do think there's a huge upswing of that occurring now, because I think we're realizing in our consumer culture, in our fast-paced, a pill solves this, a product solves that. I think we're realizing we need to slow down, and that we need to have that awareness in multiple areas. And I think this is an area that a lot of women are starting to realize has been neglected, and that we need to talk about more. Yeah, and so I think it's important that we examine our attitudes towards it, and also our attitudes toward contraception as well, specifically chemical contraception. Because it's such a normalized thing. And I mean, I'm coming from religious backgrounds, I'm coming from a Catholic background and upbringing and things like that, so I've always been told moral reasons for not using contraception and things like that. But me being what I am, and if you know me at all, I'm extremely critical, and I'm extremely I overthink everything, and I want to know why a thing is the way it is. And so I started looking more closely at okay, my church says this, and I think I agree with it. However, how can this exist as a truth outside of the church and outside of my religious upbringing? Because I think there should be that kind of integrity. And anyway, so I did a presentation in Agnes's class last term, researching women's fertility and paralleling it with ecological concepts, and that's something that Wendell Berry does a lot of, is showing the disconnect between the earth and how that has caused a shift in our physical mind-body relationships as well. And I lost my train of thought, but yes, so just the fact that this is such an important cycle that we have seemed to regulate it through chemical means was actually kind of disturbing me a little bit. And you may have remembered when Jim Merkel came, and I was asking about this whole idea of regulating natural processes and things like that, and why we as a culture necessarily accept that at a very young age a woman should just be put on birth control, it's something that's healthy for you. when in a lot of cases it's really not. And I think, I'm not trying to say this to be like narrow-minded or judgmental or see it as like no one should ever be on it ever. It's more the fact that I feel like we're not talking about the other side of it very often either. Like that there are other options besides this chemical thing that we're ingesting on a daily basis or getting shot in our arm every 3 months or whatever that is. So I'll just read this quote quickly from Fertility Charting. It's a woman who works in this full-time in Australia, and she's just pointing out that how important the ovulation part of the cycle is. So it's the true main event of the menstrual cycle, and the ovulation has significant health benefits. This is because ovulation is the way we make our female sex hormones, estrogen and progesterone. Ovulating regularly has health benefits for your heart, bones, breasts, mood, libido, energy, insulin response, thyroid, skin, hair, and so much more. And that just happens from ovulation. And a lot of our chemical contraceptives, you're not actually ovulating. That's totally repressed. And a fact that I learned when you have, depending on which mode of birth control you're on, the bleed that you have is a false bleed. It's not because you released an egg. It's not like you have to. Like you can actually just totally skip that. But it's this almost placebo thing that was like instigated because then it makes it feel a bit more natural. But in reality, it's actually your reproductive system jolting itself because you have repressed its natural cycle of hormones with synthetic hormones and repressed the natural fertility process, and it's shocked, and so it will slough off the lining to jumpstart itself, sort of thing. So that was really shocking for me to find out because I was on a form of birth control for a time for my acne, and it turns out, I'm kind of rambling all over the place, but this is all connected. It turns out that a lot of doctors in medical school, and I have this from my brother-in-law, they're encouraged to push birth control. And there's political agendas behind that, there's like economic agendas behind that because there are a lot of privatized companies that supply the pharmaceuticals for birth control. And so oftentimes doctors will throw birth control at any kind of health issue because they're really familiar with it. That's a lot of what they're educated in is that thing. And so I was shocked to find out that not only was I having false bleeds and jump-starting my fertility cycle every month and shocking it, I also found out offhand from a pharmacist that this specific brand of contraceptive I was on was like killing people because of blood clotting. It was like a specific strain. And I was like traveling on the road with the youth ministry, and I was like getting out my pills from a pharmacy in BC, and they were like, did your doctor not tell you that like 2 people died in Alberta from this? And I was like, no. So I got off that right away. So I guess my main point is there's a lot of just acceptance of like normalized ways of treating women's fertility cycle that I don't think necessarily hold water and that we need to be questioning. And that's kind of my main theme all around. I have my own reasons for thinking that, and I just really want to encourage other people to think about it more because women's health is incredibly important. I think we can all agree. Yeah, so how much time do I have left, Peter?
Well, you've got tons.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Because I have lots of time. Where shall I go from here?
And kind of depends how much time you want to leave for questions and
Yeah,
answers.
I feel like this is like very much the nature of conversation, so I'm going to leave a lot of room for questions because I feel like there's so much I could just ramble on and on about, but I want to make it a conversation, and Jake isn't going to be filming you as you're asking questions, so if you have something that's a bit more sensitive or whatever, feel free to do that because you won't necessarily have to be that exposed because it's kind of a little bit of a weird and sensitive topic, I'd say, but we're working against that now. Yeah, so another cool fact, I guess, I'll move on to a little bit more about what fertility awareness can do for your health. So I actually talked to someone named Maggie. Her name has been changed for confidentiality reasons. She suffers from endometriosis, and that is a condition in which cysts or the cells that are produced through your monthly cycle are formed on the outside of the uterus versus the inside. And she expressed a lot of frustration because she said there's not been a lot of research done on endometriosis, but it's an extremely painful condition, and it can also cause infertility a lot of the time. And she said, like, this was her opinion. She said, like, if this was a men's health issue, this would have been researched into the ground by now, you know? And so, and I do think, and I'm not someone to be like, that's, you know, like, that's sexism, that's whatever, like chauvinism. I'm not someone who calls that out very often, but the times I've felt that the patriarchy still exists in a structural way is in with the healthcare system, in numerous ways, and that's a whole other thing, like I said. Anyways, endometriosis can be very painful. It's quite mysterious. Like when I was looking it up, they were saying like we still don't really know why it happens, but it affects a lot of people. So hopefully, and I think there's more research being done on it now. Yeah, so these cysts can form on the ovaries, on the uterus, and cause like random bleeding, and your cycle can get really out of whack. And so Maggie had tried numerous things, and usually there's like, again, the first thing, I Googled it, treatment for endometriosis, and the first thing that comes up is hormonal birth control, of course. But, which can help suppress a lot of the symptoms, like a lot of the pain and the irregular bleeding and things like that, but it actually doesn't solve anything. And that's a theme I'm seeing a lot more often, is that women will have these health issues and they're prescribed birth control and it'll stop maybe the pain, but it doesn't actually stop the issue at all. And so it's just this Band-Aid solution that's very normalized, it's very, you know, like pushed for numerous reasons, and like there's a lot of good reasons why someone might necessarily feel they need to be on birth control, but we're ignoring a lot of these issues, right? So I was talking with someone yesterday, and they were saying like, yeah, so like birth control might prevent pregnancy, but we're not also paying attention to everything it's doing besides. So this Maggie was able to start tracking her cycle. So she had been through surgery, because you can get them removed, and that can really help. And I think it did to an extent. So she'd been through surgery, she'd been through all these different things, and she and her partner wanted to get pregnant, and it's very difficult, and sometimes seems impossible to get pregnant with endometriosis. But she started tracking her cycle through the fertility awareness method, and she realized that her luteal phase, so that's the phase after ovulation, before menstruation, was quite short, and she never would have known what that was or how, like, until she was educated in it. And then they realized that was because her progesterone was super low, and endometriosis is exacerbated and made a lot worse by extra estrogen. And so apparently that wasn't coming up in blood tests. Like, I don't really know how it works, but obviously this tracking of her cycle was kind of the key to then start treating it. And so she was able to take treatments following ovulation to up her progesterone levels, and they have children now. So like there's so many benefits to the fertility awareness method, whether that's just ridding your body of harmful chemicals that are involved in that, achieving pregnancy, avoiding pregnancy, and also just coming to a better relationship with your own body, which I think is really the most important thing. And yeah, I think, like I said, I think there's so much I could talk about. I do, my little feminist starts like getting really uncomfortable when I start thinking about the narratives that to me seem implicit in some of this, in that women need to regulate something and suppress something that's natural to us in order to make it in the world, you know, in order to get somewhere. And I say that in full knowledge of the fact that there's a lot of women who've experienced trauma, like sexual trauma and things, and like birth control can really help them feel in control. Like I know there's so much to it, and that's why I was so nervous to talk. But just that idea that in an article I read, this woman pointed out that a woman's fertility cycle is one of the only natural, healthy processes that is medicated. So if you think about that, I'm like, why? Why is that okay? Why is that not okay? And why have why have we moved in this direction, and is that good or is that bad? Yeah, and I would argue that if we want to use those terms, that for me, and this is where it gets kind of radical, I find it an oppressive thing to have your cycle oppressed, literally, like suppressed in that way, in order to make it in our culture. It's just so normalized. Like me at 13 or 14 going into the doctor multiple times for acne treatments, because of course I struggle with that, and him every single time being like, oh, well, you're on birth control, right? And he would forget every single time. And I don't know if that was because he was trying to make like money off of, because I know that there's like, if you sign off on certain medication, like doctors get a cut. And I don't know if he just kept forgetting. But I'm like, you have records. Like, why would you forget that I have told you multiple times as a young girl? And like, I got upset when I was little, right? I'm like, I don't know how to talk about this with you. Like, 14-year-old trying to say, I don't think birth control is like a good thing for me. And he would constantly forget and be like, oh, of course you're on birth control, so we'll figure out something to do for your acne and all that. I'm like, no, I'm not, you know? And why is that so normalized and not talked about? And I have other people in my life that have had massive weight gain and depression issues and things like that from being on patches and things like that too. So I just think there's a lot to look at there and to think about, especially like economically. Like, I don't know, that's an area I haven't even looked at yet, but who's benefiting from the contraceptive industry? Like, it is an industry, it's multi-million-dollar industry, like, because we have been conditioned to think that it's a necessity, and that's on women again. Like, that's on women to buy those things, and oftentimes, like, insurance doesn't cover that stuff. Like, I had to pay for all of that medication I took out of my own pocket, right? And so I don't think that's right either. And Wendell Berry kind of ties into that, because he talks about it as like part of the natural movement away from the earth and away from physicality and a good relationship with eating and with our bodies and everything. He sees the whole idea of fertility becoming a problem that we have to suppress. He's seeing that as that natural, well, not a natural, but logical progression towards commodification and towards product, because okay, so we've created fertility is now an issue. So now we're going to create this thing that people buy and we make money off of. And so, yeah, I thought that was a really interesting tie-in. So I'm going to read a bit from Barry, and then I think I'll just read a poem that I wrote about cycles in general, and then questions.
And we have about 5 minutes after that.
Oh, okay. 5 minutes total or 5 minutes of the 20?
5 minutes after you read the poem, I think.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so this is a quote from Wendell Berry. To divide body and soul, or body and mind, is to inaugurate an expanding series of divisions. Not, however, an infinitely expanding series, because it is apparently the nature of division, sooner or later to destroy what is divided. The principle of durability is unity. The divisions issuing from the division of the body and soul are first sexual and then ecological. They have to do with the fundamental relationships with each other and with the earth that we all have in common. Yeah, and that really ties into with something I was talking about with Tina. I hope she doesn't mind if I call her out. That's probably fine. I was like, Tina, what do I talk about? What do I talk about in this thing? And I really like what she said, so it's okay if I read it? Okay. She was like, I think it's the key to it is a reconnection with the part of yourself that has been commodified, and it unsimplifies that connection, which I thought was beautiful, because I think the whole culture of medication and like commodification is very much like, I don't have to think about this. I don't have to know about this about myself. I can just pop the pill, buy the product, whatever it is, and I'm good. I can just fix it. Fix what? I ask, but and it increases that awareness of self and what that relationship can look like. And so Barry, who's quite extreme, but I'm just going to say it, and I don't necessarily agree with everything he says, but this is from a paper I wrote on him. Barry pulls no punches. Quote, simply because it became possible and simultaneously profitable, we have cut the cultural ties between sexuality and fertility, just as we have cut those between eating and farming. The disintegration of the household led to the separation of sexuality from fertility. Personal restraint and awareness have been replaced by a chemical product, fix, or solution to a problem. Therefore, the generation that has risen from this approach sees fertility as a worry or a disease from which someone needs to be freed. While not ignoring the issue of population growth, Barry encourages a more calculated, conscious, moral approach to birth control, highlighting its grave nature. Okay. Let's see if my poem is in the right order. Yeah, so this is something I wrote. This is more about the period, but there's a lot about the relationship to the body and like the distaste and the love and all those things. So it's called Body of Water. I woke up this morning because something was clawing at my insides, trying to escape. Unwanted package, some call this part of us. Lucifer's waterfall, angrily some spit. But I, being so very close to the mothering ocean, cannot help but think of the pulsing waves and sister moon and the tide inside of me, the monthly cycle of embrace and release, of incredible strength and surrender to the moon. This phenomenon leaves some women curled on couches for days with migraines and muscle spasms and heaving stomachs, hospitalization for some, maybe only a slight inconvenience for others, source of embarrassment in middle school, self-hatred in high school, can't go swimming with my friends, ruined my new jeans, feel dirty, feel weak, feel inferior. I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. But through a journey of healing, this thing has slowly become more a reminder to stop and rest, to kneel before the ancient altar of my visceral womanhood, in between pillars of fire and flowers. These pains are tiny labors once a month, if you're lucky to be regular, and we are given the idea that we are somehow weak. If silently suffering through a womb waterfall hundreds of times is not strength, I'm not sure what is. And the nutrients that reside in those ruby drops would serve to foster a new human life if we will, or not if we don't. And why do we think that killing is stronger than giving life to something new? Why do we think bleeding shameful? Someone is trying to trick us. Sister, beware of the subtle, stalking self-hatred of being embodied. Body of water. Just like the mothering ocean assaulted with chemicals and garbage, we will be tempted to suppress and reject and pollute our shrines, terrible as they seem to us sometimes, yet they belong to us. They are good, they are strong, they give and take like the ocean, like our hearts. Bleed like the ocean during a red tide, but rather full of life. Full, breathe in and breathe out, till empty, filling. Thank you.